Alexis Davis, and I have both the honor and privilege to work under Dr. Wayne von Paternassen this summer alongside Ursa Fitzpatrick at the UT Southwestern Medical Center in the cardiology department, studying the identifications of the relationship between zinc and inorganic phosphates. Now, before I delve into the specifics of my research this summer, please allow me to provide you with a brief background in order to provide a complete understanding of my work. Now, my overall goal this summer was to understand phosphates. That was my main concern. Now, the reason why phosphates are my main concern is because although the recommended daily allowance for phosphates is 700 milligrams per day, the average U.S. adult consumes about 1,200 milligrams per day. Now, this is your combined inorganic and organic phosphate content, which I'll go into later in my presentation. However, the increase in the amount of phosphate consumption has been linked through studies in Dr. von Paternassen's lab to high blood pressure and a reduced fitness. Now, what are phosphates? So there are two types of phosphates, inorganic phosphates and organic phosphates. Now, organic phosphates are what we naturally need, right? They occur naturally in foods such as fruits and vegetables. Now, inorganic phosphates, on the other hand, are buffer salts that maintain an acid-base balance. Now, in the food world, most people know these to preserve the shelf life of their food, right? They maintain the moisture and color. However, they're not required to be presented on your nutrition labels. So although these additives are being used in your foods, you might not know it. Now, some examples of phosphates. So for inorganic phosphates, we have your fast foods, for example, your frozen meats, your foods that are pumped with preservatives so they last longer, right? They're extremely convenient. However, do we really know what's in them? Our organic phosphates, on the other hand, are going to be your nuts, your seeds, your grains, and like I previously said, they're going to be naturally occurring in your fruits and vegetables. Now, why are organic phosphates important? Because now that I've told you what they are and how people are consuming more phosphates, what does that have to do with anything, right? Like, why are they important? Well, organic phosphates are important for the formation of bones and teeth, and I don't know about you guys, but I personally have an attachment to my bones and teeth and want them to stay healthy. So they're also used to make protein for the growth, maintenance, and repair of cells and tissues, as well as ATP production. Now, effects on the food processing on zinc content. So at the beginning of my presentation, I said I wanted to identify the relationship between inorganic phosphates and zinc, right? So in food that is extremely processed or has been processed, for example, which means that they have the additives of phosphates, inorganic phosphates to be specific. Now, these foods, whenever they're becoming processed or getting the inorganic phosphates, but the zinc content begins to decrease. So, for example, first let me tell you what the recommended daily intake is in order to give you a good range, right? So the recommended daily intake for women is 8 milligrams per day and 11 milligrams per day for men. However, as depicted in the image provided in the presentation slide, via the Q1, QT, all the way through 5, these are the levels of processing. So as these foods begin to become more and more processed, as you can see through the values in the red box, the amount of zinc in that food begins to decrease, right? So we start at about 6.3 milligrams of zinc, and then it decreases all the way to 4.9. So this is just a brief example. However, when the content of zinc is decreased in our food, this can increase the risk of zinc deficiency. But let me not get ahead of myself, right? What is zinc? In order to understand what zinc deficiency is and understand what is being stripped away, we have to know first what zinc is, right? So zinc is an essential trace element that's primarily found through your food and other dietary supplements. So why is zinc important? Well, similar to phosphates, zinc is important in order to help various important functions of your body. For example, it aids in over 300 enzymatic reactions, it aids in your immune system function, protein synthesis, DNA synthesis, and growth and development. However, zinc also aids in preventing oxidative stress. Now, what is oxidative stress? Oxidative stress is the imbalance between reactive oxygen and cell detoxifying ability. So when someone is in a state of oxidative stress, this can lead to the development of cardiovascular diseases. Now, when someone is in a state of oxidative stress, this can be determined by the production of isoprostanes, which will become relevant towards the end of our presentation. But in order to maintain homeostasis, you must have a proper amount of zinc. So what happens if you don't? Well, like I previously mentioned, somebody becomes zinc deficient. And it's pretty much what the name implies. It's when you have an insufficient amount of zinc. So this can be linked to an inadequate intake, low absorption, or high excretion. So this can be due to consuming foods with small amounts of zinc, or possibly consuming foods with high amounts of inorganic phosphates, which could potentially impact the excretion of zinc, such as chips, frozen meats, and fast food, like I previously described. So now that I've provided some background information regarding my project this summer, please allow me to provide you with my research design, which essentially just depicts the work that I did this summer. Okay, so first let me start with my purpose. The purpose of my work this summer was to determine the effects of dietary inorganic phosphate on zinc metabolism. So in my experience this summer, I had my control, or my normal phosphate mice, and my high phosphate mice. Now, these mice were on a high or normal phosphate diet for a period of 12 weeks before I utilized their samples in my experiment this summer. So for the control, or the normal phosphate, they had a 0.6% of inorganic phosphate in their diet. So when I say 0.6%, that's 0.6% of their weight. So, but for my high phosphate diet, they had a 2% of inorganic phosphates in their food. But in order to keep zinc as a constant, they had 61.57 milligrams of zinc in their food diet. So the zinc was a constant in both of these mice. So the mice before were my intervention, or my samples. So it was my high and normal phosphate mice. And for my experience, I used their urine. So my urine, their urine specifically, were my samples for my experience this summer. So let me just take you over a brief overview. So the first portion that is critically important to my experiments this summer was the urine collection. Now, because, as many of you know, because you have trainings that are in your lab, we're not here for an extremely long amount of time. So the urine collection is not a process I participated in directly, because largely most of it occurred before I came. But for the urine collection, these mice were fed the high or normal phosphate diet for a period of 12 weeks. And then the urine was collected via a metabolic cage over the course of 24 hours. So then after the urine was collected, I then used it for the zinc assay, which I directly did, and then I analyzed the results. So before I delve into the intricate details of my experiments this summer, specifically the zinc assay, please take a moment to read over the materials that I utilized for my experiments this summer. Okay, so now on to the gritty details of my experiments. So I worked with the zinc assay, right? So first I created the zinc reagent mix with 4 parts to reagent 1 to 1 part of reagent 2. And then I diluted 10 microliters of the standard, which came in my zinc assay kit, to 990 microliters of their molecular grade water. After I did this, I then acidified my urine samples with hydrochloric acid. After I acidified these urine samples, I then added 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8 and 10 microliters of my standard to a 96 well plate, and then brought that well to a volume of 50 microliters, again with molecular grade water. Now, I know it might sound funny when I say I added 0 microliters, but that well served as my blink. So although technically I didn't add any standard into that well, it was still very important, which I'll explain later when I conducted and analyzed my results. So after that, I then added 200 microliters of reagent mix to every well. So the wells including my samples as well as my standards. I then added 50 microliters of the acidified urine into the suggested cells after I made a layout of what I wanted everything to look like. So this brings me to my results. So first, in order to analyze the results of my zinc assay, I first had to create a standard, or analyze the standard and create a standard curve. After I created this standard curve, I then used the equation produced through the standard curve in order to create the data points that I can then make a comparison between my high phosphate and normal phosphate samples. So in the image above, I have my standard curve graph, right? So in the equation at the very top, that is the equation that I use in order to make my calculations. Now for my zinc assay results. So depicted in the chart on your left-hand side, or it might not be your left-hand side, but in the chart, I have my high phosphate and my normal phosphate group. So for my high phosphate, I had 5 samples, and for my normal phosphate, I had 3 samples. But through the results of my assay, it's evident that there was a higher amount of zinc excreted in the urine of my high phosphate than my normal phosphate. So in the graph, you can see the drastic statistical difference between the high phosphate, which is going to be my 2% inorganic phosphate, and the normal phosphate mice, right? So this means that there was more zinc excreted in the high phosphate mice than the low phosphate mice. So this brings me back to the isoprostanes that I mentioned before in my slide, right? That zinc is supposed to help protect you from, right? The isoprostanes are produced when someone is in oxidative stress. And so zinc is supposed to prevent oxidative stress. So after I analyzed the results of my zinc assay and saw the drastic statistical difference of the amount of zinc excreted between my high phosphate and my normal phosphate mice, I was able to see that possibly this might mean that my high phosphate mice are zinc deficient, right? So if they're zinc deficient, that could also possibly mean they're also undergoing oxidative stress, which is why I tested for isoprostanes, because as I mentioned before, isoprostanes are a marker for oxidative stress. So in the graph, it depicts yet again a drastic statistical difference between the high phosphate, which is my 2%, and my normal phosphate mice. So for the isoprostanes, there was a larger amount of the isoprostanes present in my high phosphate mice than my low phosphate mice, which leads me to believe that my high phosphate mice are also undergoing oxidative stress as well as possibly zinc deficient. So this leads me to my discussion. So in the conclusion of my experiments this summer, I was able to conclude that the high or inorganic phosphate diet leads to an increase in the urinary zinc loss, which may predispose for zinc deficiency. So this was via my results, right? So the drastic statistical difference between my high phosphate and my normal phosphate diet mice. Then I also concluded that the high inorganic phosphate diet leads to the production of an increased amount of the oxidative stress markers. So that was my isoprostanes. So this might also be related to the zinc loss. In the future, my lab would like to research if the mice have low zinc levels in their tissue, as well as look at the different zinc absorptions in various populations. I would like to take this time to thank the following people. Without the help of these people, my experience this summer would not have been possible. So please just take a brief moment to overview these people. So the main people are going to be my family, which played a vital role in me getting here, as well as Ms. Dawn, played a vital role in me getting here, and Dr. Vaughn, because without her, I wouldn't have a lab to be in. And it was it was a really great experience to be in her lab this summer. So thank you for your valuable time. That is the conclusion of my presentation. Are there any questions, concerns,